I stared at the text message, glowing on my phone screen, my hands trembling slightly as I read Candace's words again. Heat up the leftovers in the fridge. Don't waste them. The whole family had just returned from celebrating her big promotion at that upscale steakhouse downtown. Everyone went except me. They told me to stay home because someone needs to watch the house. Now they expected me to eat their scraps, like some forgotten family pet. I typed back okay with shaking fingers, but something deep inside my chest snapped. This was absolutely the final straw. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was to what was really happening. When my beloved husband Harold passed away 2 years ago, my son David insisted I move in with him and Candace. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," he'd said, wrapping his arms around me at the funeral. "We're family. We take care of each other." Those first few weeks felt warm and welcoming. Candace would ask my opinion on dinner plans, include me in conversations about the kids' school activities, and even sought my advice about her sales job at the medical device company. I felt needed, valued, like I still had a place in this world despite losing my partner of 38 years. But gradually, things shifted in ways so subtle I almost didn't notice. It started with small comments. "Robbie, maybe you should rest instead of coming to Sarah's soccer game. It's going to be muddy and crowded." Or, "The restaurant we picked for date night is really loud. Mom, you'd hate it." Candace's promotion to regional sales director had been in the works for months. When she finally got the news 3 weeks ago, the celebrations began immediately. First, there was drinks with her work colleagues on a Wednesday night. "You wouldn't know anyone there, Robbie. Just boring work talk," she'd explained while applying her lipstick in the hallway mirror. Then came David's suggestion for a family dinner at that new Italian place on Friday. "Actually, Mom," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we made reservations for 6 people, and they're totally booked. Maybe we can take you somewhere nice next weekend instead." Next weekend never came, of course. Instead, there was Candace's work party at her boss's house on Saturday. "It's really just for employees and their spouses," she'd said, her voice carrying that apologetic tone I was beginning to recognize. "Company policy and all that." Each exclusion came with a reasonable explanation, a logical reason why I couldn't participate. But tonight's celebration dinner had been the cruelest cut of all. They'd all gotten dressed up in their finest clothes, laughing and chatting excitedly about trying the famous prime rib at Harrison's Steakhouse. My grandson Tyler had even worn a tie, and my granddaughter Emma had put on her new dress from the mall. "Someone really should stay here and keep an eye on things," Candace had said, adjusting her pearl earrings. "You know how break-ins have been happening in the neighborhood lately." "What break-ins?" I'd lived in this area for over 40 years and couldn't remember a single burglary. But I'd nodded along, playing the dutiful mother-in-law, the compliant widow who didn't want to cause trouble for her generous family. As I sat in the empty house, listening to their car disappear down Maple Street, something nagged at me. I wandered into David's home office, not snooping exactly, just straightening up the scattered papers on his desk. That's when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A group text conversation was pulled up on his computer screen, left open in his haste to get ready for dinner. The contact list showed family planning with David, Candace, Tyler, and Emma. My name was nowhere to be found. The messages went back weeks. "Mom's going to want to come to the soccer tournament," David had written. "How do we handle that?" Candace's response made my knees buckle. Same strategy as always. Make it sound like we're protecting her from something unpleasant. She always buys it. "I feel bad sometimes," Emma had typed, followed by a crying emoji. "Don't," Candace had replied immediately. "She's becoming more difficult and demanding every day. This is actually helping her transition to being more independent. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message documenting their careful orchestration of my isolation. Birthday dinners I was excluded from, family movie nights that happened without me, shopping trips and weekend getaways planned deliberately around my absence. But the worst discovery came in the most recent messages, sent just this morning while I was at the grocery store. "The promotion celebration tonight is perfect timing," Candace had written. "I've already started spreading the word to extended family that Robbie's been showing signs of confusion and memory issues. When we start the process, everyone will understand why it's necessary." "What process?" Tyler had asked. The response from Candace chilled me to the bone. Getting her into proper care. I've found some excellent facilities that specialize in early dementia cases. She'll be much happier somewhere, with people her own age and professional staff to help her. David's reply was just 3 words. If you think so. My own son was agreeing to ship me off to a nursing home, based on lies his wife was spreading about my mental state. I closed the laptop with trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst right through my chest. That's when I realized tonight's dinner exclusion wasn't just another petty slight. It was a celebration of Candace's promotion and their upcoming success in removing me from their lives permanently. They were toasting their freedom from the burden of caring for Harold's difficult, senile widow. The text about leftover food wasn't about preventing waste. It was about reminding me of my place in their hierarchy, grateful for scraps, invisible when inconvenient, and manageable through careful manipulation of my emotions and circumstances. As I stood in that quiet house, surrounded by family photos that suddenly felt like mockery, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I was going to become their worst nightmare. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Harold's death. While Candace rushed around getting ready for work, and David left early for a construction job in Riverside, I decided to do some cleaning. Real cleaning. The kind where you organize drawers and file cabinets, and discover things that have been hidden from view. I started in David's office, the same room where I'd uncovered their group text conspiracy. As I dusted his desk, I noticed a filing cabinet I'd never paid attention to before. The top drawer was labeled Household Financial Documents in Candace's neat handwriting. My heart began racing as I opened it, though I told myself I was just organizing paperwork like any helpful mother-in-law might do. Inside, I found folder after folder of bank statements, bills, and financial documents. Most of them looked normal. Mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery receipts. But then, I found a folder labeled Robbie's Accounts that made my breath catch in my throat. Inside were bank statements for an account I didn't remember opening. The account number looked familiar, but the statements showed deposits I'd never made and withdrawals I'd never authorized. My Social Security checks were being deposited there, along with my pension payments from the school district where I'd worked as a bookkeeper for 22 years. The monthly deposits were substantial: $1,400 from Social Security, $850 from my pension, and another $600 from Harold's Veteran Survivor benefits. Over $2,800 every month flowing into this account. But the withdrawals told a different story. Mortgage payments of $1,600. Utility bills totaling $300. Grocery bills averaging $500 monthly. Car payments, insurance premiums, credit card payments, all coming directly from my income without my knowledge or explicit consent. I grabbed the most recent statement with shaking hands. According to these documents, I was paying for nearly everything in this household while being treated like an unwelcome guest who should be grateful for their hospitality. Digging deeper into the file, I found more shocking evidence. A credit card statement showed a charge for $2,300 at Henderson's jewelry store, dated just last week. The description read diamond tennis bracelet, with a note in Candace's handwriting. Promotion gift. From Robbie's household contribution. Household contribution. They were stealing my money and calling it a contribution, as if I'd voluntarily agreed to bankroll their lifestyle while being excluded from the benefits. But the most devastating discovery was buried at the bottom of the folder. A manila envelope contained documents I'd completely forgotten about. After Harold's funeral, when I was drowning in grief and unable to think clearly, David had asked me to sign some papers to make handling your finances easier during this difficult time. I'd trusted him completely. He was my son, my only child, the man Harold and I had raised to be honest and dependable. I'd signed whatever he put in front of me, without reading the fine print. Now, looking at those documents with clear eyes, I understood what I'd actually agreed to. I'd given David power of attorney over my financial accounts. I'd authorized him to manage my Social Security and pension benefits. I'd essentially signed away control of my own money to a son who was using it to subsidize his family's lifestyle while planning to put me in a nursing home. The The cruelest irony was that they didn't need my money. David's construction business was thriving, and Candace's promotion came with a significant salary increase. They were stealing from me not out of financial desperation, but out of pure greed and opportunity. As I sat surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, I heard a key turning in the front door. Candace was home early from work, probably riding high on congratulations from colleagues about her promotion. I quickly returned the documents to their folders and closed the filing cabinet, my mind racing with possibilities. "Robbie?" Candace called from the front hallway. "Are you here?" "Just doing some tidying up in David's office," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her navy business suit, and that satisfied smile I now recognized as the expression of someone who thought they were successfully manipulating a helpless old woman. "You're such a help around here," she said, though her eyes quickly scanned the room to make sure I hadn't disturbed anything important. "I hope you enjoyed those leftovers from last night. The prime rib was incredible. You would have loved it." The casual cruelty of her comment, combined with my fresh knowledge of their financial abuse, made something snap inside me. But instead of confronting her immediately, I smiled sweetly and nodded. "It was delicious," I lied smoothly. "Thank you for thinking of me." "Of course," she replied, already turning to leave. "Family takes care of family, right?" As her footsteps disappeared upstairs, I sat back down at David's desk and began forming a plan. They thought they were dealing with a confused, grateful old widow who would accept whatever scraps they threw her way. They had no idea they'd been financially abusing a woman who'd spent decades keeping books for the largest school district in the county. I knew exactly how to document financial fraud. I knew which agencies to contact, which laws they'd broken, and how to build an airtight case against people who steal from vulnerable elderly family members. More importantly, I knew secrets about my own financial situation that even David didn't know. Harold had been far more successful than we'd ever let on, and the full extent of my resources would shock them to their very core. But first, I needed to gather evidence, protect my assets, and plan my exit strategy. Because if they wanted to play games with a supposedly helpless old woman, they were about to discover that this particular grandmother had claws they never knew existed. Over the next week, while maintaining the facade of the grateful, compliant mother-in-law, I methodically prepared for war. Every day while they went to work and school, I used my time strategically, building a case that would destroy their comfortable assumptions about controlling my life. First, I photographed every single document in David's filing cabinet using my smartphone. Harold had insisted I learn to use technology properly, saying, "Robbie, the world's changing, and you need to change with it." Now I was grateful for his persistence as I carefully documented each bank statement, each forged signature, each unauthorized transaction. The signatures were the most damning evidence. David had been signing my name on checks and financial documents for over a year, getting sloppier and more confident as time went on. A handwriting expert would have no trouble proving fraud, especially since I'd kept samples of my real signature in Harold's old jewelry box. Next, I contacted Frank Morrison, Harold's best friend from their army days in Vietnam. Frank had become a successful businessman after the war, and more importantly, he maintained connections throughout the veteran community. When I explained my situation, his gravelly voice turned ice cold. "Robbie, what you're describing is elder abuse, plain and simple," he said. "Harold's spinning in his grave knowing his own son would steal from his widow. I'm connecting you with someone who can help." That someone turned out to be Patricia Wells, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and had strong ties to veteran advocacy groups. When I met her at her downtown office, she listened to my story with growing outrage. "Mrs. Henderson, what your son and daughter-in-law have done constitutes multiple felonies," she said, reviewing the photographs I'd taken. "Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We can not only recover your stolen money, but also pursue criminal charges." But Patricia's most valuable advice was about protecting assets I hadn't even mentioned yet. "Before we file anything publicly, we need to secure your independent resources. Do you have any accounts or assets they don't know about?" That's when I told her about Harold's real legacy. My husband had been far more successful than we'd ever let our son know. Harold's construction company, Henderson Building Solutions, had grown into one of the most respected commercial contractors in the region before he retired. He'd invested wisely, saved aggressively, and built a portfolio worth nearly $800,000 by the time of his death. David knew about the house Harold left me and the basic life insurance policy. What he didn't know was that Harold had established a complex trust structure to protect our assets from potential elder abuse, having seen too many of his army buddies victimized by greedy relatives. The trust contained Harold's business assets, real estate investments, and a substantial stock portfolio. As the surviving spouse, I had complete control over these resources, but we'd never mentioned them to David because Harold worried about creating dependency or entitlement in our son. "Your husband was very wise," Patricia said, reviewing the trust documents I'd brought from my safety deposit box. "These assets are completely protected from their schemes, and the income alone could fund a very comfortable, independent lifestyle." Working with Patricia, I began executing my departure plan. She helped me establish new banking relationships that David and Candace couldn't access, transferred my Social Security and pension deposits to accounts they'd never find, and prepared legal documentation that would freeze their access to money they'd been stealing. Meanwhile, I researched living options that would shock them with their luxury and independence. Through my connections at the Veterans Support Center where Harold and I had volunteered, I discovered Meadowbrook Senior Community, an upscale residential complex designed for active adults over 55. These weren't nursing home apartments for confused elderly people. These were luxury condominiums with full kitchens, private balconies, fitness centers, and social activities designed for vibrant, independent seniors. The community even had a business center where residents could pursue consulting work or manage their investments. Using funds from Harold's trust, I purchased a beautiful 2-bedroom unit overlooking the community garden. The monthly fees included housekeeping, maintenance, gourmet dining options, and transportation services, but residents maintained complete independence and privacy. As moving day approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. Excitement about starting a new chapter of life on my own terms, but sadness about the betrayal that had made it necessary. David had been such a loving son growing up, and I'd hoped that generosity and kindness would carry into his adult relationships. On the morning I planned to leave, I woke early and prepared my final surprise. Instead of simply disappearing, I was going to leave them a comprehensive presentation about their crimes and the consequences they'd face. I arranged everything on the dining room table like a business meeting, because that's essentially what this had become, a hostile takeover by an elderly woman who refused to be victimized by her own family. The centerpiece was a detailed financial analysis showing exactly how much money they'd stolen from me, $34,200 over the past 18 months. Every unauthorized withdrawal was highlighted and documented with corresponding bank records. Surrounding that central document were photographs of forged signatures, copies of the group text messages I'd discovered on David's computer, and printouts of their nursing home research, including price quotes and availability inquiries for facilities specializing in dementia care. But the real shock would be the final document, a complete accounting of my actual financial resources, proving that they'd been stealing from someone who was not only financially independent but actually wealthier than they'd ever imagined. I also prepared a recording device with audio clips I'd captured over the past week using my smartphone. Candace discussing the Robbie problem with her sister over coffee in the kitchen. David telling a friend on the phone that they might have to make some hard decisions about Mom's living situation soon. Comments about my supposed mental decline and their burden in caring for a difficult elderly relative. As I packed my personal belongings into suitcases I'd hidden in the basement, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was about to teach them a lesson about underestimating people, about the consequences of greed and manipulation, and about the difference between being old and being powerless. They thought they were dealing with a helpless victim. They were about to discover they'd been abusing a woman with resources, intelligence, and connections they never knew existed. The final touch was a note I left on top of all the evidence. "I may be 67 years old, but I'm not dead yet. Check your bank accounts. Check your legal status. Then call me when you're ready to have an honest conversation about respect, family, and consequences. Your move." With my bags loaded in the taxi waiting outside, I took one last look at the house where I'd been made to feel unwelcome in my own family. Then I walked out the door, toward a future they never imagined I was capable of creating for myself. The war was about to begin, and they had no idea what they were up against. At exactly 6:30 that evening, I watched from my new apartment at Meadowbrook as David's pickup truck pulled into their driveway through the live video feed I'd arranged. Patricia had suggested installing small security cameras around the property before I left, both to protect my belongings I'd left behind and to document their reaction to my revelations. Through my smartphone screen, I watched David climb out of his truck looking tired from a long day installing kitchen cabinets in a new housing development. Candace emerged from her silver sedan, still riding high from what had probably been another day of congratulations about her promotion from colleagues who had no idea about her home life crimes. Tyler and Emma bounded out of the school bus and raced toward the front door, backpacks bouncing, probably expecting to find their grandmother ready with after-school snacks and homework help as usual. "Grandma Robbie?" Emma called as they opened the front door. "We got our science test grades back." The silence that followed was visible, even through the grainy video feed. I watched David and Candace exchange confused glances as they stepped into the front hallway. "Mom?" David called, his voice carrying that slight concern of someone who expected a response but wasn't getting one. "Mom, are you here?" They moved through the house systematically, checking the kitchen where I usually prepared dinner, the living room where I typically watched the evening news, and finally my bedroom upstairs. I could imagine their growing puzzlement as they found my closet empty and my personal belongings gone. But the real shock came when they walked into the dining room and discovered what I'd left behind on their polished oak table. Through the camera mounted in the corner of the room, I watched Candace freeze mid-step when she spotted the organized presentation waiting for them. David moved closer to the table, his construction worker hands reaching tentatively toward the documents as if they might explode. "What the hell is all this?" Candace whispered, her professional composure cracking as she recognized her own bank statements spread across the surface. David picked up the central document, my detailed financial analysis, with its highlighted evidence of unauthorized transactions. I watched his face transform from confusion to recognition to something approaching panic as he realized what he was looking at. "Oh God," he murmured, sinking into one of the dining room chairs. "Oh Jesus, Candace. She knows everything." Candace snatched up the printouts of their group text messages, her face turning pale as she read her own words about spreading rumors of my mental decline. Her hands shook as she flipped through page after page of their documented conspiracy to manipulate and isolate me. But the moment that gave me the most satisfaction was watching them discover the audio recordings I'd left on a small digital player positioned prominently in the center of the table. When David pressed play, their own voices filled the room discussing me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Candace's recorded voice was particularly damaging. "She's becoming more difficult and demanding every day. This is actually helping her transition to being more independent. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Tyler and Emma had wandered into the dining room by then, drawn by their parents' obvious distress. I watched Emma pick up one of the nursing home brochures I'd left displayed, her 14-year-old face scrunching in confusion. "Why do you have information about old people homes?" she asked innocently. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. David and Candace looked at each other with the expression of people who realized they'd been caught in a web of lies that was about to unravel in front of their children. "Your grandmother is having some health issues," Candace began, but Tyler interrupted her. "Grandma Robbie seems fine to me," he said, his 16-year-old skepticism cutting through adult lies with brutal honesty. "She helps me with my math homework every night. Her brain works better than mine does." That's when they found my note, positioned strategically at the bottom of the evidence pile. I watched David read it aloud, his voice getting quieter with each word. "I may be 67 years old, but I'm not dead yet. Check your bank accounts. Check your legal status. Then call me when you're ready to have an honest conversation about respect, family, and consequences. Your move." The silence that followed was broken by Candace frantically pulling out her smartphone and accessing their online banking. I knew exactly what she was discovering because I'd been copied on every notification. All joint accounts containing my money had been frozen pending investigation of unauthorized access. Her monthly automatic withdrawals for mortgage, utilities, and credit card payments were about to bounce. The household budget they'd built around stealing my income was collapsing in real time. "The accounts are frozen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is frozen. How did she do this?" David was staring at the final document I'd left for them, a complete summary of my actual financial resources, including Harold's trust fund, real estate investments, and the new luxury apartment I'd purchased at Meadowbrook. The numbers were staggering even to me when I saw them totaled up in black and white. "She has $800,000, he said slowly, as if saying the words would make them less shocking. "Mom has $800,000, and we've been stealing her Social Security checks like she was some charity case." The weight of their stupidity was finally hitting them. They hadn't just been stealing from a helpless elderly widow. They'd been stealing from someone with more money than they'd ever see. Someone with the intelligence and connections to destroy their comfortable lives completely. Emma was reading over her father's shoulder, her young mind processing numbers that represented more money than she'd ever imagined existed. "Dad, Grandma Robbie is rich?" "Very rich," David replied, his voice hollow with the realization of how catastrophically they'd misjudged the situation. Tyler was examining the legal documents I'd left behind, including restraining order paperwork and elder abuse complaint forms that had already been filed with local authorities. "Are you and Mom going to jail?" he asked with the blunt directness that only teenagers can manage. The question hung in the air, as David and Candace fully grasped the magnitude of their situation. They'd alienated, stolen from, and attempted to institutionalize someone who possessed the resources and determination to end their freedom, their careers, and their comfortable suburban lifestyle. I turned off the video feed and poured myself a glass of wine in my beautiful new apartment, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The shock phase was complete. Now came the interesting part, watching them decide whether to double down on their lies or finally face the consequences of their actions. Either way, they were about to learn that this particular grandmother was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined possible. By the next morning, Candace was in full crisis management mode, but she'd made a critical error in judgment. Instead of accepting responsibility for their actions, she chose to double down on the narrative about my supposed mental decline, apparently believing she could convince people that all my documentation was the confused ramblings of a woman with dementia. I watched her strategy unfold through a network of connections she didn't know I possessed. My friend Margaret from the church quilting circle called me at 8 in the morning with an update. "Robbie dear, Candace called Pastor Williams this morning, claiming you've been having episodes and that you've disappeared from home," Margaret reported, her voice tight with disapproval. "She's asking him to organize a search for a confused elderly woman who might be wandering around town." This was exactly the kind of mistake I'd hoped she'd make. By reaching out to our church community with lies about my mental state, Candace had unknowingly contacted a group of people who'd known me for decades and could easily verify my competence and clarity. Pastor Williams, who'd counseled Harold and me through our marriage difficulties and celebrated our anniversary blessings, wasn't fooled for a moment. When he called me directly at 10 that morning, his voice was warm with concern, but also sharp with suspicion about Candace's story. "Robbie, I just received a very troubling call from your daughter-in-law," he said. "She seems to believe you're suffering from some form of cognitive decline, but frankly, you sound as sharp as ever to me. What's really going on?" I gave him a brief overview of the financial abuse and manipulation, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Pastor Williams listened with growing outrage, particularly when I mentioned their plans to institutionalize me based on fabricated mental health concerns. "This is elder abuse, pure and simple," he said firmly. "Robbie, you have the support of this entire church community. Whatever you need, we're here for you." But the pastor's support was just the beginning. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves a respected longtime resident being mistreated by family members. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from people Candace had contacted in her misguided attempt to control the narrative. Harold's army buddy Frank had been particularly busy on my behalf. As a successful businessman with connections throughout the veteran community, he'd reached out to people in positions of real power: Judge Robert Chen, a retired family court judge who now volunteered with veteran advocacy groups. Susan Rodriguez, the president of First National Bank, who'd served with Herald on several charity boards, and Michael Thompson, the editor of the County Herald newspaper, who'd written numerous articles about Herald's community service over the years. The chain reaction was swift and devastating to Candace's reputation. Judge Chen immediately recognized the legal implications of what she and David had done and offered to connect me with the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Susan Rodriguez flagged their accounts for fraud investigation and sent representatives to document their unauthorized access to my funds. Michael Thompson began researching a story about elder abuse prevention that would feature my case anonymously but include enough details that local readers would easily identify the perpetrators. Meanwhile, Candace's professional life was beginning to unravel in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Her promotion to regional sales director had made her a public figure within the medical device industry, and news of her personal ethical failures was spreading through professional networks faster than she could contain it. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the chief medical officer at Regional Medical Center and one of Candace's biggest clients, called me personally after hearing about the situation through her own church connections. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm appalled by what you've told me," she said during our conversation that afternoon. "Medical ethics require that we work only with vendors who demonstrate integrity in all aspects of their lives. I'm recommending that our hospital reconsider its contracts with your daughter-in-law's company." The ripple effects were exactly what I'd hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Candace had built her career on relationships and reputation within our tight-knit community. By attempting to destroy my credibility through lies about mental illness, she'd instead exposed herself as someone who would fabricate medical conditions to cover up financial crimes against vulnerable family members. Her company's ethics department launched an investigation within 48 hours of my filing formal complaints. Regional sales directors in the medical field are held to extremely high standards of honesty and integrity, particularly when dealing with healthcare providers who trust them with sensitive procurement decisions. David's construction business faced similar scrutiny. Word had spread through the building trades that he'd been stealing from his elderly mother while planning to put her in a nursing home against her will. In an industry built on handshake deals and personal reputation, such behavior was considered beyond unforgivable. 3 of his regular clients called to cancel ongoing projects, citing concerns about his character and reliability. The owner of Riverside Building Supply, where David had maintained credit accounts for over 10 years, demanded immediate payment of outstanding balances and terminated his credit terms. But the most satisfying development came through Tyler and Emma's social networks. Teenagers have no filter when it comes to family drama, and both kids were struggling to process their parents' behavior. Emma had confided in her best friend about finding nursing home brochures and discovering their grandmother was secretly wealthy, while Tyler had told several classmates about his parents potentially facing criminal charges. Within the insular social environment of their high school, the story spread rapidly among parents who knew me through school events, volunteering activities, and community functions. These were people who'd seen me clearly engaged and competent during parent-teacher conferences, fundraising committees, and athletic events. Candace's claims about my mental decline contradicted years of personal observations from dozens of reliable witnesses. The Teenage Gossip Network even reached back to Emma's middle school, where I'd volunteered as a reading tutor for 3 years. The librarian, Mrs. Foster, called me directly to express her support and disbelief at suggestions I was mentally incapacitated. "Robbie, you helped my struggling students improve their reading scores more than some professional tutors," she said. "Anyone claiming you're confused or incompetent is either lying or delusional themselves." By the end of that second day, Candace's strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating sympathy for a family dealing with a difficult elderly relative, she'd painted herself and David as greedy opportunists who'd steal from and lie about someone the community respected and valued. The final blow to her credibility came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Morrison, my longtime family physician and Frank's younger brother, issued a written statement confirming my mental competency and excellent cognitive function based on my recent annual physical examination. Mrs. Henderson shows no signs of cognitive impairment, memory loss, or any condition that would affect her decision-making capacity, his letter stated. Any claims to the contrary are not supported by medical evidence and appear to be fabricated for non-medical purposes. As I sat in my beautiful new apartment that evening, surrounded by flowers and support cards from community members, I realized that Candace and David had made the worst possible choice. Instead of quietly accepting responsibility for their actions and seeking forgiveness, they'd declared war against someone with deeper roots and stronger relationships than they'd ever understood. The community battle was won. Now came the final phase, watching them realize that their comfortable life built on stolen money and manipulated relationships was about to collapse entirely, and that their only hope of salvaging anything was to face the truth about what they'd done and who they'd done it to. 3 days after their world started collapsing, David and Candace appeared at my apartment complex, looking like people who'd aged years in a matter of hours. I watched them through my window as they sat in their car for nearly 10 minutes, apparently gathering courage for a conversation they weren't prepared to have. When they finally knocked on my door, their appearance shocked me despite everything they'd done. David's usually confident construction worker posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man carrying unbearable weight. Candace's polished professional appearance had crumbled into something approaching desperation, her hair unwashed and her business suit wrinkled as if she'd slept in it. "Mom," David began, his voice cracking slightly as I opened the door. "Can we please talk to you?" I led them into my spacious living room, noting how their eyes widened as they took in the luxury furnishings, the view of the community garden, and the obvious expense of my new lifestyle. This wasn't the cramped apartment of a woman dependent on their charity. This was the home of someone with resources they'd never imagined. "We know you're angry," Candace started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to tell me how I feel. You get to listen while I explain the situation you've created for yourselves." They sat on my cream-colored sofa like children called to the principal's office, their eyes focused on their hands rather than meeting my gaze. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we all knew it. "David, your construction business has lost 60% of its clients in 3 days, I began, consulting notes I'd prepared for this conversation. "Candace, your company has placed you on administrative leave pending completion of their ethics investigation. Your promotion has been suspended, and 3 major clients have specifically requested that you not be assigned to their accounts." "Mom, we can explain," David tried to interrupt, but I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The bank has frozen your joint checking account pending investigation of unauthorized access to my funds. Your mortgage payment was returned for insufficient funds yesterday morning. Your credit card companies have been notified of the fraud investigation, and your credit scores are about to reflect missed payments and suspended accounts." Candace made a small choking sound, the reality of their financial collapse hitting her with full force. They'd built their lifestyle around my stolen income, and without access to those funds, they couldn't maintain their basic expenses. "But the most serious problem you face," I continued, "is the criminal investigation. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, identity theft, and conspiracy charges carry serious penalties in this state. We're talking about potential prison time, not just financial consequences." "We were helping you manage your finances," Candace said desperately, finally looking up at me. "You seemed overwhelmed after Harold's death, and David was just trying to take care of you." The lie was so brazen, so obviously contradicted by their own documented behavior, that I almost laughed. "Helping me by excluding me from family activities while spending my money on luxury dinners I wasn't invited to attend?" I asked. "Helping me by forging my signature on financial documents? Helping me by researching nursing homes to warehouse me against my will?" "We thought it would be better for you," David said weakly. "Those places have professional staff and people your own age." "David," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I want you to look around this apartment. Really look at it." He raised his eyes and surveyed my living space with fresh attention. The custom kitchen with granite countertops, the hardwood floors, and crown molding, the expensive artwork on the walls and the view of landscaped gardens through floor-to-ceiling windows. "This is a 2-bedroom luxury condominium in the most exclusive senior community in the county," I explained. The monthly fees are $2,800, which I pay easily from investment income alone. I have access to a fitness center, a business center, gourmet dining, housekeeping services, and social activities with people who share my interests and education level. Candace was staring at me with growing horror as the implications sank in. How much money do you actually have? I opened a folder I'd prepared and handed her a simplified financial statement. Harold was much more successful than we ever told you. We were testing your character by letting you believe I was dependent on your generosity. The numbers on the page were staggering. $837,000 in investment accounts, $215,000 in real estate equity, monthly income from pensions and investments, totaling nearly $4,000. You have almost $1 million, David whispered, his voice hollow with realization. I'm a millionaire being stolen from by people making a combined income of $80,000 annually, I confirmed. Your financial crimes weren't just morally wrong, they were spectacularly stupid. Candace buried her face in her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. They hadn't just betrayed a vulnerable, elderly woman, they'd betrayed someone with the resources to destroy their lives completely. What do you want from us? David asked, his voice barely audible. I want you to understand that respect and love can't be purchased with stolen money, I replied. I want you to recognize that excluding someone from family activities while taking their money isn't help, it's abuse. I want you to acknowledge that lying about someone's mental health to justify institutionalizing them against their will is evil. We're sorry, Candace said, tears streaming down her face. We're so sorry. We never meant for things to go this far. You're sorry you got caught, I corrected. You're sorry about the consequences, but you're not sorry about the behavior, because you spent months planning and executing every detail. The silence that followed was broken by David's quiet sobbing. My strong, capable son who'd built houses with his bare hands was crying like a child who'd finally understood the enormity of his wrongdoing. Can you forgive us? He asked through his tears. Is there any way to fix this? I looked at these two people who'd caused me such pain and betrayal, and I felt something I hadn't expected, a possibility of hope. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because their genuine remorse suggested they might actually be capable of change. Forgiveness isn't something you get by asking for it, I said carefully. Forgiveness is something you earn through consistent actions over time. The question is whether you're willing to do the work required to rebuild trust you've completely destroyed. Anything, Candace said immediately. We'll do anything. We'll see, I replied. But first you need to understand that your old life is over. The life built on stolen money and manipulated relationships is finished. What happens next depends entirely on whether you're capable of building something honest to replace it. As they left my apartment that evening, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but I took no joy in watching my own family face the consequences of their greed and deception. The real test would come in the months ahead. Whether they would learn from this devastation, or simply become bitter about losing control over someone they'd underestimated so completely. Either way, I was no longer their victim. I was a strong, independent woman with resources, community support, and the self-respect that comes from refusing to accept unacceptable treatment from anyone, including family. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Thanksgiving dinner for a family that looked very different from the one that had excluded me from their celebration dinner less than a year ago. The changes in all of us had been profound, painful, and ultimately healing in ways I never could have anticipated. David knocked on my apartment door at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and wearing the expression of a man still learning to live with the consequences of his choices. Behind him, Candace held a homemade pumpkin pie, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that reflected her dramatically changed circumstances. Tyler and Emma followed their parents, both teenagers noticeably more mature than they'd been when this crisis began. Emma carried a handwritten card expressing gratitude for lessons about honesty and respect, while Tyler brought photographs from his community service work at the Veterans Center, inspired by stories about his grandfather's military service. The legal resolution had been swift but fair. David and Candace had pleaded guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation charges, receiving suspended sentences conditional on paying full restitution, completing community service, and attending mandatory counseling. They'd lost their comfortable suburban lifestyle but avoided prison time because of their cooperation and genuine remorse. Candace's career in medical device sales was finished, but she'd found work as a customer service representative at a local insurance company, earning a fraction of her previous salary while slowly rebuilding her professional reputation. The humility required to start over in her 40s had been devastating, but ultimately transformative. "I know now that I was addicted to status and appearances," she admitted during one of our monthly reconciliation dinners. "I thought manipulating you was justified because it maintained the lifestyle I believed our family deserved. I was wrong about everything." David's construction business had failed completely, but he'd found steady employment with a former competitor who specialized in veteran housing projects. Working on homes for retired military families had given him new perspective on service, sacrifice, and the meaning of real success. "Dad's been learning about Grandpa's war service," Tyler had told me during one of our weekly phone calls. He never realized how much Grandpa went through, or how that shaped the values he tried to teach our family. The children's transformation had been the most encouraging development. Seeing their parents face serious consequences for dishonest behavior had forced both teenagers to examine their own choices and values. Emma had started volunteering at the senior center, where I taught financial literacy classes, helping elderly residents protect themselves from scams and abuse. Tyler had become passionate about veteran advocacy, inspired by learning about Harold's service and the tight-knit military community that had rallied around me during my crisis. He was considering military service himself after graduation, drawn to the honor and integrity he'd observed in Harold's Army friends. "I want to be the kind of man Grandpa Harold was," he'd told me. "Someone who keeps his word and protects people who can't protect themselves." My own life had blossomed in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The financial literacy classes I taught at the senior center had expanded into a full curriculum on elder abuse prevention, drawing participants from across the county. My story, shared anonymously through local media, had inspired other elderly adults to seek help for similar situations. Pastor Williams had asked me to lead a support group for seniors dealing with family conflicts, providing a safe space for people to share their experiences without judgment. The sessions often reduced strong, independent people to tears as they described feeling invisible, unwanted, or manipulated by adult children they'd sacrificed to raise. "You've given us permission to demand respect," one group member had told me. "You've shown us that being old doesn't mean being powerless." But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my relationship with the grandchildren. Tyler and Emma now visited me weekly, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed spending time with someone who treated them as intelligent young adults, capable of learning from difficult experiences. "Grandma Robbie," Emma had said during our last visit, "I'm proud that you fought back. I used to think old people just accepted whatever happened to them. You taught me that respect isn't something you lose when you get older unless you give it away." The reconciliation with David and Candace had been gradual and conditional, built on consistent actions rather than empty promises. They'd attended counseling sessions, completed their community service hours, and slowly demonstrated genuine changes in their behavior and priorities. "I don't expect you to trust us again quickly," David had said during one of our early reconciliation meetings. "But I hope someday you'll believe that we've learned from this and become better people because of it." That someday had arrived gradually, through small acts of respect and consideration that proved they understood the magnitude of what they'd done wrong. Candace had written letters to each person she'd contacted with lies about my mental health, apologizing for her dishonesty and explaining the real situation. David had taken responsibility for his financial crimes in conversations with extended family, ensuring that everyone understood I had been the victim, not the problem. As we gathered around my dining table for Thanksgiving dinner, I looked at faces that reflected hard-earned wisdom about family, respect, and the consequences of taking people for granted. The conversation was genuine rather than polite, focused on gratitude for second chances rather than complaints about inconveniences. "I'm thankful that Grandma Robbie was stronger than we knew," Emma said when we shared our annual blessing thoughts. "And I'm thankful that our family learned how to be honest with each other, even when it's hard." Candace wiped tears from her eyes as she spoke next. "I'm thankful for the opportunity to rebuild relationships I almost destroyed through my greed and pride." I'm thankful that forgiveness is possible when people are willing to change genuinely. David's voice was steady but emotional, as he added, I'm thankful that my mother taught me the difference between helping someone and controlling them. I'm thankful for the chance to become the son she deserved all along. Tyler concluded our sharing by saying, I'm thankful for learning that respect isn't automatic just because someone is family. I'm thankful for understanding that real love means treating people with dignity, not managing them for your own convenience. As we enjoyed the meal I'd prepared in my own kitchen, in my own home, surrounded by family members who now understood the difference between charity and respect, I reflected on the painful journey that had brought us to this point. The text message about heating up leftovers had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but the real issue had never been about food or dinner invitations. It had been about dignity, respect, and the fundamental human need to be valued rather than managed. I'd learned that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that having money isn't as important as having self-respect, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. David and Candace had learned that manipulation and exclusion aren't forms of help, that stealing from vulnerable people has serious consequences, and that building a lifestyle on lies and deception ultimately destroys everything you're trying to protect. The children had learned that respect must be earned through actions rather than demanded through relationships, that honesty is more valuable than comfort, and that watching adults face consequences for bad choices can be the most important education they'll ever receive. Most importantly, our family had learned that love without respect is just sentiment, that forgiveness without change is just enabling, and that real relationships require treating each other as equals, deserving dignity rather than problems to be solved or managed. As we cleaned up dishes together that evening, working as a team rather than a hierarchy, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from betrayal to healing had been painful for everyone involved, but it had created something stronger and more honest than what we'd lost. Sometimes the most important gift you can give someone is refusing to accept their worst behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is demonstrate that actions have consequences. Sometimes the only way to save a family is to be willing to lose it. I'd packed my bags and left when they expected me to eat their leftovers and be grateful for scraps. What they found when they came home was evidence of their crimes and proof of their profound misjudgment about who they were dealing with. But what they discovered in the months that followed was something more valuable: the opportunity to become people worthy of genuine respect rather than manipulated compliance. Now, as I settled into my comfortable chair to watch the sunset over the community garden, I thought about other families struggling with similar dynamics. Elder abuse happens in every community, often hidden behind closed doors and polite explanations about helping elderly relatives who seem confused or difficult. If you've ever felt dismissed, excluded, or manipulated by family members who claim to have your best interests at heart, remember that age doesn't automatically make you powerless. If you've ever watched someone you love being treated disrespectfully by people who should protect them, remember that silence enables abuse. And if you're someone who's ever justified controlling or excluding an elderly family member for their own good, remember that dignity and respect aren't luxuries that people outgrow as they age. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took you for granted? What would you do if you discovered someone was manipulating a vulnerable person in your community? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help spread awareness about elder abuse prevention. Subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for dignity and respect in family relationships. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that it's never too late to demand the treatment you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, respect isn't something you lose with age unless you choose to give it away. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never underestimate the power of an elderly person who refuses to be anyone's victim. Until next time, may you always know your worth and have the courage to defend it when necessary. Take care, and God bless.